The sun was just beginning to rise over the bustling streets of New York City, casting a golden glow over the quiet neighborhood by the East River. Joggers and dog walkers had just started their morning routines, the air crisp and filled with the sound of distant traffic. Among them was Rachel Parker, a 32-year-old fitness enthusiast who ran the same route every day. She had no idea her life, and the lives of countless others, was about to change forever. As Rachel jogged along the riverbank, something caught her eye. At first, it looked like an ordinary suitcase, slightly scuffed, lying in the brush a few feet from the path. She might have ignored it, thinking it was just discarded luggage, but something about its placement seemed off. It was too close to the water, and the zipper looked strained, as if the suitcase was bursting at the seams. Her curiosity got the better of her. She slowed down, stepping cautiously toward the object, her heart beginning to race for reasons she couldn't yet explain. The smell hit her before she even reached the suitcase, a sickly metallic odor that sent alarm bells ringing in her mind. Rachel recoiled, covering her nose with her sleeve, but she couldn't look away. With trembling hands, she reached out and unzipped the suitcase, her stomach churning with dread. What she saw inside would haunt her for the rest of her life. Tangled within layers of plastic bags was a human body, or rather, parts of one. Pale, lifeless limbs, twisted unnaturally, and dark stains seeped through the makeshift wrappings. Rachel stumbled backward, letting out a scream that echoed through the stillness of the morning. Other joggers nearby froze in their tracks, their faces turning pale as they realized something terrible had happened. Within minutes, the scene was swarming with police officers, their flashing lights reflecting off the water. The area was cordoned off, yellow tape fluttering in the breeze as detectives and forensic teams began their grim work. Rachel, still shaking, was led to the side by an officer who tried to calm her down enough to give a statement. Her mind raced as she replayed the horrifying image over and over. Detective Laura Bennett arrived shortly after, her face a mask of professionalism, despite the horror she knew awaited her. She had been on the force for over a decade and had seen her share of gruesome cases, but this one felt different. There was something eerily personal about the way the body had been dismembered and stuffed into the suitcase, as if the killer wanted to send a message. The victim was quickly identified as Lisa Harper, a 28-year-old woman who had been reported missing 3 days earlier. Lisa's friends and family described her as kind, hardworking, and full of life. She had no known enemies, no apparent reason why anyone would want to harm her. But as the investigation progressed, the seemingly perfect image of Lisa's life began to crack, revealing secrets that would take the case in a shocking direction. The suitcase itself was the first major clue. It was an expensive designer piece, not the kind of thing someone would discard lightly. Inside, investigators found not only Lisa's remains, but also a single strand of blonde hair that didn't match her own. They also discovered faint traces of soil and plant matter, suggesting the suitcase had been moved from another location. These clues hinted at a methodical killer who had gone to great lengths to conceal their crime, but had made critical mistakes along the way. As news of the grisly discovery spread, the media descended on the neighborhood, turning the quiet riverside area into a frenzy of reporters and camera crews. The public was horrified, their imaginations running wild, with theories about who could have committed such a heinous act. Was it a jealous lover? A stranger with a dark obsession? Or someone much closer to Lisa than anyone could have imagined? For Detective Bennett, the first step was retracing Lisa's final days. Security footage from her apartment building showed her leaving on the evening of April 12th, wearing a bright red coat and carrying a small handbag. She appeared calm, unaware that she was walking into danger. Witnesses reported seeing her at a nearby cafe later that night, where she met with an unidentified man. The man, described as tall with dark hair, was caught on surveillance cameras leaving the cafe with Lisa. But after that, the trail went cold. In interviews, Lisa's friends and family painted a picture of a woman who was kind but private. She had recently ended a tumultuous relationship with her boyfriend Greg, but insisted to friends that she was fine and ready to move on. Greg was quickly brought in for questioning, his alibi scrutinized. He claimed he hadn't seen Lisa in weeks, but his nervous demeanor and vague answers raised red flags.
As the months wore on, Martha found herself grappling with conflicting emotions. She loved her children deeply and felt pangs of guilt every time she kissed them goodnight, knowing she was living a double life. She questioned her faith, wondering if Andrew's proclamations about their divine connection were true or merely a convenient excuse for his actions. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to end the affair. Andrew's promises of a future together, free from the constraints of their current lives, kept her tethered to him. Andrew, on the other hand, began to see Martha as both a blessing and a liability. While he genuinely enjoyed her company and the passion she brought into his life, he was also acutely aware of the risks involved. His position as pastor granted him a certain level of untouchability, but a scandal of this magnitude could destroy not only his career, but also his marriage to his wife, Rebecca, and the trust of his congregation. Yet, like Martha, he found himself unable to let go. The first major turning point came on a cold November evening. Thomas, who rarely ventured into Martha's world at church, decided to surprise her by attending a committee meeting she'd claimed to be organizing. When he arrived, he found the church empty, save for Clara Benson, who was tidying up hymnals in the back pew. Confused, Thomas inquired about Martha's whereabouts. Clara, ever the opportunist, seized the moment to plant seeds of doubt. She casually mentioned that Martha had left hours ago with Pastor Andrew, her tone dripping with insinuation. Thomas brushed off Clara's comment as harmless gossip, but a seed had been planted. That night, as Martha returned home late, her explanation of an extended meeting seemed rehearsed. For the first time, Thomas noticed the faint smell of cologne on her clothes, one that didn't belong to him. He said nothing, choosing instead to silently observe, hoping his fears were unfounded. Martha, unaware of Thomas's growing suspicions, continued her double life. Her relationship with Andrew became more reckless. They began meeting during daylight hours, taking calculated risks that only heightened the thrill. But with every risk, they edged closer to discovery. By Christmas of 1992, the tension in the Dillard household was palpable. Thomas had become distant, spending long hours at work or retreating into silence at home. Martha, consumed by her affair, barely noticed the shift in his demeanor. It was during this time that Clara Benson decided to take matters into her own hands. Armed with a disposable camera and an unwavering sense of righteousness, she began following Martha and Andrew, determined to catch them in the act. What Clara discovered would set off a chain of events that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. And as the year turned, the tranquil facade of Copperfield, Texas, began to crack, revealing a dark and tragic truth that no one could have foreseen. By early 1993, the mounting tension surrounding Martha and Pastor Andrew's affair had reached a boiling point. Clara Benson, armed with her damning photographs, wasted no time in spreading whispers throughout the church community. She began with subtle insinuations during Sunday coffee hours, her sharp tongue weaving doubt and intrigue into the minds of the congregation. Within weeks, rumors of an inappropriate relationship between the pastor and a married woman had spread like wildfire. Martha and Andrew, oblivious to the brewing storm, continued their reckless romance. They frequently met in secluded spots, exchanging hurried kisses and stolen moments. Andrew, however, began to feel the weight of his duplicity. His wife, Rebecca, had grown suspicious of his late-night prayer sessions and increasingly erratic behavior. Rebecca's sharp instincts were a stark contrast to Thomas Dillard's trusting nature. While Thomas struggled to confront his doubts, Rebecca quietly began piecing together the puzzle. One fateful day in March 1993, Clara confronted Rebecca after a church service. "Rebecca, dear," she began with feigned sympathy, "I've been praying for your strength lately. It must be hard seeing Andrew so distracted." When Rebecca pressed for clarification, Clara hesitated, enjoying the moment. "I've seen things," Clara finally admitted. "Andrew and Martha, together. And not in ways that seem godly." Rebecca's blood ran cold. Though she had suspected something was amiss, hearing her fears echoed aloud shattered her composure. That night, as Andrew slept soundly beside her, Rebecca searched through his belongings. In her briefcase, she found motel receipts and a hidden love note from Martha. Rebecca didn't confront Andrew immediately. Instead, she carefully plotted her next move, enlisting the help of her brother, Jack, a retired police officer. Together, they devised a plan to expose Andrew's infidelity publicly. Rebecca's goal wasn't just to end the affair, but to ruin Andrew's reputation entirely. Meanwhile, Thomas, who had been growing increasingly distant from Martha, decided to follow her one afternoon when she claimed she was volunteering at the church. He watched from a distance as Martha parked her car near a remote motel, and saw Andrew's familiar figure emerge from a vehicle parked nearby. The sight of his wife embracing another man crushed Thomas. He drove home in a daze, his mind swirling with anger and heartbreak. That night, when Martha returned, Thomas confronted her. "How long has this been going on?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. Martha, caught off guard, stumbled over her words, but Thomas's piercing glare forced her to admit the truth. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. It just did." Thomas's response was cold and measured. "You've destroyed this family, Martha," he said, before walking out of the room. The next few days were a whirlwind of chaos. Rebecca, fueled by her discovery and Clara's evidence, began disseminating the motel receipts and photographs to the church elders. A special meeting was called, and Andrew was summoned to explain himself. Standing before the very people who had once revered him, Andrew tried to deny the allegations, but the evidence was overwhelming. As the church descended into scandal, Martha faced her own reckoning. Thomas filed for divorce, and the couple's children, confused and heartbroken, were caught in the crossfire. Martha's once pristine reputation lay in ruins, and she became the subject of vicious gossip in the community. Andrew, now ostracized by his congregation, turned to Martha for solace. "We can start over," he told her during one of their clandestine meetings. "Leave all of this behind and build a life together." Martha, desperate for any semblance of stability, agreed. But Rebecca wasn't finished. Furious that Andrew had seemingly escaped with Martha to start anew, she pressured Jack to take more drastic action. Jack, leveraging his connections in law enforcement, began investigating Andrew's financial records. What he found was shocking. Andrew had been embezzling funds from the church for years, funneling money into secret accounts. Armed with this information, Rebecca went to the authorities. Within weeks, Andrew was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud. The media caught wind of the story, and the scandal made headlines across Texas. By mid-1993, Andrew sat in a county jail awaiting trial. The charismatic preacher who had once inspired a community now faced a future behind bars. Martha, ostracized and alone, visited him regularly, clinging to the hope that they could still build a life together once his sentence was served. However, Martha underestimated the depth of Rebecca's fury. Rebecca, still reeling from the betrayal, couldn't bear the thought of Andrew and Martha living happily ever after. Consumed by rage, she hatched a plan to ensure they would never be together. On a stormy night in September 1993, Martha returned home from a visit to the jail. As she unlocked the door to her small rented apartment, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Rebecca. "You ruined everything," Rebecca spat, her voice trembling with emotion. Before Martha could respond, Rebecca pulled out a small pistol. The confrontation escalated quickly, with Rebecca accusing Martha of destroying her life and stealing her husband. Martha, terrified, tried to reason with her, but Rebecca was beyond persuasion. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Rebecca pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the apartment complex. Neighbors called the police, who arrived to find Martha lying in a pool of blood, and Rebecca sitting silently beside her, the weapon still in her hand. Rebecca was arrested without resistance. Martha's death sent shockwaves through Copperfield. The woman who had once been the talk of the town for her scandalous affair was now the victim of a brutal crime. Andrew, upon hearing the news, reportedly broke down in his cell. For the first time, he truly understood the destruction his actions had caused. Rebecca's trial was swift and highly publicized. Her defense argued that she had been driven to a temporary state of insanity by the betrayal and humiliation she had endured. The jury, while sympathetic, ultimately found her guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As for Andrew, his trial for embezzlement concluded shortly after. He was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Once a revered figure, he now languished in obscurity, haunted by the consequences of his choices. The Dillard children, left parentless, were taken in by Thomas's sister, who moved them out of Copperfield to shield them from the lingering stigma. Years later, the scandal remained a cautionary tale in Copperfield, a tragic reminder of how love, betrayal, and vengeance could unravel lives and shatter communities.